Hello, everyone. Our technical support, is my voice clear?
We're hearing you loud and clear, Dr. Asma.
Excellent. So, hello, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to participate in our first virtual conference, Education Disrupted, Education Reimagined. My name is Asma Al-Fadala, and I am the Director of Research at WISE, an initiative of Qatar Foundation. WISE is a global platform dedicated to thinking and building the future of education. Special thanks to our speakers and keynotes. We have 40 speakers and more than 3,000 participants registered in the two-day conference. The United Nations has described the global scale and pace of education disruption due to COVID-19 as unparalleled. Across the world, over 1 billion students are out of school, with numbers increasing each day. Education officials at all levels, in addition to parents and caregivers, are attempting to keep students engaged and learning at home through a variety of ways. However, with all the fear, panic, and unknowns, new channels of innovation and creativity are also accelerating at unprecedented levels. School systems have been challenged to rethink traditional learning models and rapidly build, test, and pilot new structures to accommodate a completely different reality. So we must ask ourselves as a global community what we can learn from this to improve our systems for the future. In partnership with Salzburg Global Seminar, WISE decided to organize this conference in 5 parts to accommodate participants in different time zones. We added a new session. I would like to encourage you all to register for the UN special session that we just announced, and it's happening tomorrow at 3 p.m. Doha time, featuring presentations from the education heads at UNICEF, UNRWA, UNHCR, and the director of the GEM report. We had the first part today at 9 a.m. Doha time, discussing how leaders, policymakers, and practitioners around the globe are currently responding to the COVID-19 crisis. And we will continue the discussion in this session. And day 2, which is tomorrow, will consider the opportunities the current situation presents to accelerate system-wide innovation for the future. We will consider these topics from a number of perspectives, as we did this morning. Topics including educational leadership, social and emotional learning, educational technology, and quality and access. More specifically, focusing on key questions. Number 1, in what directions should school leaders be navigating their systems to become more resilient and future-ready in the face of an uncertain future? What are members of our community doing now in their systems to accommodate an unprecedented reality where the majority of their students are learning remotely? And this morning we had discussion from China, Australia, from Qatar, South Africa, Kenya, India, and others. How can we learn from the experience of others to lead and strengthen our own systems in the face of unexpected crises? Where does well-being and SEL fit into all of this? And Mark, our keynote, will explain this more. Is SEL even more critical now to cope with the uncertain and unpredictable future? How can we ensure that all students have access to quality remote learning programs? More specifically, in places where internet connectivity is unreliable or there is little access to home computers and other such as e-learning devices. Earlier this morning, Doha time, it was great to hear the discussion and see the engagement and lively conversation on social media and on the chat section here. Over the next parts of our event, we hope to engage in thoughtful and lively conversation about these and other important topics as we continue to confront this challenging time. We are fortunate enough to have a lineup of incredible speakers from around the world, from practitioners on the front line, researchers and policymakers to lead us in these discussions, but we also hope to hear from you, our participants and our audience. Finally, I'm very happy to introduce you to Dominic, Program Director at our partner organization, Salzburg Global Seminar, who will walk you through some of the technical logistics of our discussion, the purpose of organizing this event, and how to engage our community during and after our conference. And also he will share some of the insights came from the morning session. Thank you and enjoy our event.
Thank you, Dr. Asma. I'm Dominic Register. I work on education programs at Salzburg Global Seminar, and I'm also delighted to welcome you all to the Education Disrupted, Education Reimagined conference. Salzburg Global Seminar is an independent, not-for-profit organization founded in 1947 in the aftermath of World War II and based in Salzburg in Austria. Our core mission is to challenge current and future leaders to shape a better world, which feels particularly topical and timely in the context of the current crisis, and more specifically for our conference over the next 2 days. And I'm also, along with Dr. Asma and several other speakers, part of Karanga, the Global Alliance for Social Emotional Learning and Life Skills, and we will hear a lot about social and emotional learning during this conference. This conference has come together in just 3 weeks, and we have a fantastic lineup of thinkers and education leaders across the 2 days. And we're very grateful to all of you for giving of your time and sharing your expertise. When we first started to plan the conference, we settled on 3 key objectives. We wanted to help understanding around what is happening in different education systems during the COVID-19 pandemic. We wanted to provide an opportunity for the exchange of ideas and practice across different education systems in terms of what is working as short to mid-term education responses to the disruption that the pandemic is causing. And we wanted to help stimulate global conversations about how education can be part of a Build Back Better narrative and what might change within education systems when the new normal emerges post-COVID-19. And all of the different components of the next 2 days of conference and the conversations that we will help organize in the weeks that follow are intended to help meet those different objectives. The level of interest in the conference and the number of people who've registered for it, particularly in the last couple of days, has inevitably changed some of the ways we had planned to engage with the audience during it. For example, as the numbers grew, we decided to host it as a Zoom webinar, which limits the degree of interaction that there can be. However, one of the great advantages of virtual or online convening is that we're not time-bound in the way that we would be if we were all physically together for the next 2 days. So we see the next 2 days as very much the beginning of a whole series of different conversations that we hope will help shape, refine, and improve how education systems respond to the disruption that the pandemic causes. And we hope will also go on to help shape fairer education systems that are better designed around 21st century lives. Both Salzburg Global and WISE also see this as the first in a series of similarly themed online conferences, and we're very keen to hear from you and work with you to shape the focus and agenda for future conferences in the series. The final part of each session in the conference, the now slightly misnamed community conversation, will focus on this. In this morning's part, in the earlier part of the conference, we focused on 7 key themes in this part of the conversation, which were social and emotional learning, technology, early years interventions, working with teachers, working directly with families, inequality, and what we value most in education. And it'll be really interesting over the next couple of hours to see what themes come to the fore in our discussions. Please use the chat function and the Q&A function in Zoom to share where you're from, where you're socially distancing from at the moment, or physically distancing but socially connected from. Use the chat function to share research or articles that are pertinent to the discussion at the time, and to post questions and comments as the conference progresses. Each of the different moderators has a small team of people working with them to monitor the chat, and we'll try and bring in key themes when we get to the Q&A part of each section. And we will also revisit the dominant themes in the community conversation at the end. Everyone who's joining through Zoom can download and save the chat when they leave the conference. One of our mantras at all of the programs we run in Salzburg is to be tough on the issues, but kind on each other. So even if you disagree with a comment, we would ask you all to respect that approach. And finally, we would love for the conversation over the next few days to move beyond those of us who are joining through Zoom. So please take the conversation far and wide on social media. We're using 3 hashtags for this: hashtag SGSEdu, hashtag WiseAllIn, and hashtag FutureEd. It now gives me enormous pleasure to hand over to my friend and colleague, Claire Shine, who's the Vice President and Chief Program Officer of Salzburg Global Seminar. And it is also Claire's birthday today. So thank you, Claire, for joining us on your birthday. And Claire's going to take us through the first keynote session. And you're muted, Claire.
I'm now unmuted. I was listening admiringly to Dominic, and I'm thrilled to be joining you all today, especially on my birthday in a beautiful sunny day in Salzburg. Dominic already mentioned this idea of Build Back Better, which is becoming one of the dominant hashtags, but whilst it reveals opportunity, it also reveals so many challenges. There are 3 lenses that we're looking at the moment: economic, environmental, and social. This conference is really focusing on the social and human capital that is so critical to the work of education. But we can't detach the business of education, the business of learning, and the feelings of teachers and learners from that broader ecosystem that surrounds us and the worries that go with it. On day 1 of today's conference, we've been focusing on education disrupted. How are different leaders, thinkers, and practitioners responding to the crisis? For me, I think there's a lot that is visible. The politics, the business, the formal infrastructure, from transport to shops to schools. That's where the spotlight is. The statistics are huge, they are terrifying, and they carry with them a kind of burden of depersonalization. Or when we are personalizing, we often do it around calamity, around doom and gloom. But what about the invisible, the deeply personal, and the deeply human? You know, as teachers, as educators, as parents, as co-workers, as caregivers, that the individual, the personalized, and especially those on the margins, are particularly vulnerable and fragile during this incredible experience and trauma for our collective societies. In some ways, our personal lives feel a little like tsunamis. Our capacity to think straight, to organize, to just make sense of our days, our family lives, has all been disrupted. And as somebody who came from the world of sustainable development and climate change, I see some of the same forces at work in terms of a sense of impotence, that our human scale, our agency to make a difference, is grossly impacted. This goes to the very heart of human well-being. And so we're very lucky to have as our keynoter today, Mark Brackett, author of Permission to Feel. Mark is a psychologist. He's founding director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and a professor at the Child Study Center at Yale University. Mark's work is really focused on evidence, on an evidence-based approach to social and emotional learning. And he has specialized in the whole role of emotions in decision-making, relationship quality, mental health, which is such an important issue at this moment. He's an expert in measuring emotional intelligence and looking both at best practices for teaching it and for the influence of that training on children's and adults' effectiveness, their health, their creativity, and the climate of school places and work. And last but very much not least, Mark, as many of you will know, is the lead developer of RULER, which stands for the 5 key emotional skills of recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating emotions. And ruler has been adopted by over 1,500 public charter and private schools across the US and in many other countries. I should add before I pass to him that he's also an expert in martial art, and I hope it's helping him in living with in-laws and generally staying happy in these times. So Mark, I'm going to pass over to you, but I have to ask you first of all, how are you and what is life like for you and how are you doing at this moment?
Well, hi, Claire. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful. I've been joking these days that I'm the one who's supposed to ask people how they're feeling. I'm not supposed to be asked that question myself. um, Truthfully, I'm feeling very excited to be here with all of you for this conference, but at the same time, I was stressed out and a little bit overwhelmed, and I think all the more reason why I have decided to focus my presentation right on supporting our nation, our world, really, and thinking more critically about how to manage their feelings during these difficult times. So I'm going to upload my presentation if it's at all possible. I think I need to be given the, there we go. Okay, everyone. Well, just to reintroduce myself very quickly, my name is Mark Brackett, and I am a professor at Yale University. And I am excited to be here with all of you today. The title of my presentation is Permission to Feel. It is also the title of my newest book, Permission to Feel. And I'm going to ask us all to just start with a little reflection. And the question is, why do we need permission to feel? Why does that matter? You might even think about what that brings up for you. What does it make you think about? And I will just give you a brief anecdote about this title. In my many years as a psychologist and as a developer of an approach to social, emotional, and cold ruler, I've had the privilege of running around the world and working with schools, every kind of school you can imagine. And I was in a district here in the United States that was a high poverty district that had, unfortunately, lots of students who were not succeeding academically, and principals and teachers of schools who were just very unhappy. And when I went to work with them, the basically I was warned that I was going to be, Mark, you better be careful. They're going to, throw you into the ocean. And I decided to make that district my project. The long story short is that on the first day of this interaction with 100 of the leaders of this big school system, I was at the lunch line, and I looked over at one of the leaders and I said to him, hey, like, what do you think of this training? And he looked at me and he goes, well, sir, the food looks like it's going to be pretty good. And I was like, okay, I need to really figure out how to meet this person. Long story short, at the end of the 2 days, I decided to take a risk, and I said, so it's been 2 full days of training. What do you think? Can we do this together? Are we going to be able to do this work with your 30,000 students? And he stood up out of his seat in front of his 100 peers. He started crying, and he looked at me and he said, thank you for giving me permission to feel. And he was a man from another country originally, and he said that he grew up in a society where a male could not have feelings, where he had never really even knew there was a language for feeling, where he didn't know that he could strategize with his emotional life. And so he really didn't know what he didn't know. And I think that for many of us, this emotion field is information that we didn't know. And truthfully, I didn't know what I didn't know until I learned it and then became a professor of it. So with that said, my contact information is here. I'm just going to share a slide. If you're interested in social media, obviously use all the social media that our friends here at WISE and Salzburg Global have provided you. Just from my sense, I like to give people upfront, you can go to our websites to learn and get free resources. And that's all. Now, I started off by sharing a story. What I'd like to do now is get you to think about how you're feeling. This is a tool that we've developed at the Center for Emotional Intelligence. It's called the Mood Meter. And it asks us to take a moment to reflect on our experience. We've got the yellow, the red, the blue, and the green. Yellow, high energy and pleasant, happy, excited, optimistic, hopeful. Green, calm, content, tranquil, peaceful. Blue, down, disappointed, hopeless, despair. Red, irritated, angry, enraged, or uneasy, or anxious, or even overwhelmed. So take a moment and maybe think about, how are you feeling right now? What's the word that best describes how you're feeling? Do you have a word? Is it challenging to find a word? So I see people saying energized, a little bit green. So we're going to go from color to feeling word. I want the specific word: calm, hopeful, scared, organized and optimistic, mixed emotions, curious, a little anxious, stoic. Lots of different feelings. And as you think about this, here I am, a presenter. I'm in New Haven, Connecticut, in the United States right now. I'm talking to people all over the world who are having all kinds of feelings. How might that influence the way I teach you right now? Can I do anything about how you're feeling? And I think that's a really interesting question that we're going to have to answer in this world of virtual learning. So it looks like most of you, however, are in that yellow and green space. And what I want to share with you are some data. This is a study that I did about 2 to 3 years ago with 6,000 educators from across the United States of America. And what we found was frustration was the top emotion that our educators were experiencing back then. As a matter of fact, 70% of the words that teachers used to describe how they felt each day could be classified as negative emotions. I had the privilege of doing a study last week, about 2 weeks ago now, with the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, CASEL. I'm a board member of that organization. And we launched a webinar series to help them learn strategies to manage their feelings. But before we did that, what we did was we asked them to tell us how they felt. And here's how they felt. And I'm hearing people want to see me. And I realize now that you can. I've got all this new equipment in my home to be like a Mr. Fabulous webinar presenter. And of course, I don't even put my camera where it's supposed to be. So as you can see here, the number one emotion among our nation's educators was anxiety. And this, by the way, were people across the globe, not just in the USA. Number one feeling was anxiety. When we asked people the reasons for their anxiety, we found that people were fearful of getting sick, fearful of having to work from home in childcare. I love this quote from, this is actually a friend of mine who is, she's in her 40s. She's got 2 young children. She's a teacher. Her husband is a teacher. They have, and my vision of finally having someone else take care of my kids, even virtually, was smashed to smithereens. This requires 100% parent involvement, meaning e-learning. Actually 200%, because the girls are in different grades. So you can see here that for many people, this new world is very difficult, both to be at home all the time, to be having your own career, and also to be working with your children. Second, or third, I should say, people are concerned about equality of education. There are equity issues right now. As a matter of fact, New York City Public Schools has now shut down all virtual learning in terms of using Zoom technologies because of equity issues and privacy issues. So how are we going to reach our kids now without technology? Being cooped up at home, feeling isolated and lonely. People are worried about the economy. Obviously, many people are losing their jobs in today's economy, and access to food and resources. I can tell you from my own, I live in I'm in a very privileged perspective right now, being a professor and, financially secure. But even getting basic needs met, going to get toilet paper or paper towels, is extraordinarily challenging. So we have people who are going from worrying about being sick to managing their lives to worrying about finances to just getting access to food. Now, when you go back to our mood meter and you look at how people are feeling these days, what you see is that we are emotionally out of balance. Think about it. Way too many of us are experiencing those red and blue emotions. And I think one of the problems is that we've been told, at least in the United States, that the goal has to be yellow. You've got to be happy all the time. Now, I will be truly transparent with all of you. I am a neurotic professor. I'm never going to be happy. Well, that's not true. I'm not going to be happy all the time. And I don't think that's what we should be asking people to try to experience. Because what research shows is that sometimes the more we strive to be happy every day, the more sad, the more disappointment, the more overwhelmed we get. Because think about it, right now, should we be telling people to not feel anxious and overwhelmed and scared when it's real? Should we tell them to be happy? I don't think so. So the question is, how do we get greater balance in terms of our emotional lives by giving people the permission to feel their anxiety, but also potentially the strategies to help them manage it effectively? Because what we're finding in our research is that people are not dealing very well with their feelings. When I interviewed people over the last couple, I'm screaming too much. I'm consuming way too much social media. I'm watching way too much stupid television. I'm drinking way too much alcohol. I'm overeating. I'm oversleeping. I'm losing my temper. Does that look like anyone else? Anyone uh, resonate with these strategies? I can tell you, I am not used to being home as much as I've been home. So I'm usually teaching and on the road, doing presentations and everything. And now for the last 5 weeks, it's been me with my family every day from morning until night. Please do not interview my family about my day job. It is the joke in the family that I'm the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence. So what can we do to make a difference? A few things. One, I think we have to learn the science of emotion. Like we all need to become scientists, emotion scientists. We have to understand that social emotional learning skills are not soft skills. The mindset is still that this is soft and it's secondary. That cognition is the critical one and emotion is the secondary one. Our brains are replete with feelings and thoughts, and they can work together or they can work in opposition. We need to move beyond that happiness is the answer. We need to focus a lot more on prevention so there's less need for intervention. I can tell you right now, in our country, had we had a government that was more prevention focused with the coronavirus, we would be in a very different place right now. The same thing applies to our mental health. The same thing applies to our physical health. The same thing applies to teaching social and emotional learning. The question for everyone is how much or how integrated is this into the core curriculum? When you examine the day in the life of a student from early morning till afternoon across the week, how much are we learning about social and emotional learning? Or is it just Friday feelings day? Which means we need greater balance. We have to educate families because they're a critical part of children's development. We got to eliminate the quick fix, the assembly, the kit, right? That's not what social and emotional learning is. It's about systemic change. Think about it. It's about how leaders lead systems. It's about how teachers teach their children. It's about how students learn and interact with the world. And it's about how families participate. And finally, we have to figure out ways to overhaul outdated and often harmful policies. So, for example, in the United States, 19 of our states still allow for corporal punishment. I am yet to see the research which shows that children who are hit in schools do better academically or have better relationships or better self-esteem. So the Center for Emotional Intelligence has a vision. It's to use the power of emotions to create a healthier and more equitable, innovative, and compassionate society. Ruler is the name of the approach, and Claire was kind enough to talk about Ruler in terms of the set of skills and our approach. And our model is simple. We want to go from piecemeal to systemic. Here's the theory of change. And I apologize for the density of this slide, but I'll explain it very carefully. I started off my career only caring about kids. I was a kid who was abused as a child. I had sadly been abused by a neighbor. I had very low self-esteem. I was not a good academic student. I was very badly bullied in my school for my weight, for my appearance, for many, many things. And so when I went into the field of social emotional learning, I said, how am I going to help kids? Because I don't want kids to have to go through what I went through. And so I worked with my uncle, who is my hero and savior, on a curriculum, and we failed. We failed because what we learned very quickly was if the adults who are raising and teaching kids don't have the skills that we want kids to learn themselves, we're not going to be successful. And then we found that the leaders don't have that buy-in or don't have that willingness to integrate it. It's never going to happen and have sustainability. So our model, very briefly, is a strategy that involves adult professional learning and tools to help monitor the evaluation and tools to help people progress through their learning. It's for everyone. There are 4 aims that I would argue for any intervention to have impact, whether it be ruler or another approach to social and emotional learning. We've got to shift people's mindsets. We've got to deepen their understanding of these skills and learn them. And I will tell you that, with my example of bullying and abuse, my parents were not equipped to deal with it. They were smart, though, and they put me in to see a therapist. So I went to a therapist who was very kind and compassionate and supportive. The challenge was that I returned back to a family that just wasn't very emotionally skilled, and I returned back to a school where no one learned this. So just isolating an individual to try to develop them without shifting the context that surrounds them is not going to have the impact. And by the way, that context is a classroom, it's a school, it's a community, it's a state, it's a country, and I'm hoping the world. And then finally, we have to figure out ways to infuse this information to the pedagogy, the practices, and school-wide policies. And then my hope is that we'll get the outcomes that we all care about. There are 5 reasons why we focus on emotions, because emotions are the drivers of our attentional capacity. The reason why I was a terrible student as a child was obviously not because of my intelligence. I'm a smart guy, but my emotion system completely took over my cognitive system. But no one understood that back then. No one understood the way the brain operates in terms of how neurons are fired when you're in that fight or flight response that make it biologically impossible to absorb information. People didn't know it. The second is decision making. How we feel drives our decisions. The third is relationship quality. I don't know about you, but it's very hard for me to work with people who are very aggressive and very difficult and contentious, right? They send signals, avoid, avoid, avoid. People who show more compassion, they say approach, approach, approach. We did a study with teachers, and what we showed was that the climate of their school was predictive of how they felt, and in turn, predictive of their physical and mental health. So our emotion system and our physical health system and the environments that we're in are all linked together. Finally, performance and creativity. What we say in our center is that emotions are the fuel of creativity, and our skills of emotional intelligence, they determine whether or not we have the reality, the product. Can we get through the difficulty, the challenging times to complete it? So I have a question for all of you. Are you an emotion scientist or are you an emotion judge? Are you open? Are you critical? Are you curious or are you closed? Do you want to get granular and specific or do you want to clump everything? Do you have a growth mindset? Do you say to yourself, I can learn this, and if I fail, it's just a learning opportunity? Or do you say, it's hopeless. This is who I am, and I'm never going to change? So the scientist judge piece is very important to me because it's going to dictate whether you're open to learning the skills. Will you actually spend the time to learn these skills? Will you dedicate the amount of time to develop that understanding of emotion, that labeling skill? knowing how and when to express. We're in a room, in a webinar right now with people from around the globe. So sometimes my sense of humor is seemed weird or off to people because it's my way. And maybe that's the Connecticut, United States way. I've gone to other countries where we don't bow to each other here. They bow to each other. There's no right or wrong, right? It's about being the scientist and exploring and learning about how people operate. That's what's so great about emotional intelligence, is that it allows us to be culturally responsive, because I'm not going to tell you what to do to regulate your feelings. I'm going to work with you to find the strategies that are going to work best for who you are in your context. So very briefly, as I bring my time with all of you to a close and talk with Claire, emotion regulation is at the top of the hierarchy of emotional intelligence. It's around the thoughts and the actions we use to deal with our emotion lives in the service of having well-being, good relationships, making good decisions, and attaining our goals. When it comes to managing stress and anxiety, right now we are a world filled with stress, unpredictability, uncontrollability, and it's sustained. Think about that. We are feeling like, I don't know what's going to happen with the coronavirus. I have no control over it, and it just feels like it's never going to go away. When we have that kind of emotional life, we call that chronic stress. Our brain is in that fight or flight danger mode around the clock. And it, coupled with poor nutrition, poor sleep, and not enough exercise, oftentimes our worst selves comes out, as we've seen if we watch the news. People spraying people, gargling with Clorox, panic buying of toilet paper, saying meaner, hurtful things, catastrophic thinking. So my last few minutes with you, I wanted to share some strategies. And obviously you can contact me to go into greater detail with these. I've written a lot about them. The first is we've got to learn how to manage our physiology. So maybe we can all just take a deep breath right now. How about a universal deep breath to just deactivate? Maybe an inhale. I'm talking fast because I only got a little bit of time with all of you. I got to chill out. Self-care. Are you managing yourself properly? Are you getting the sleep you need? Are you eating nutritious foods? Are you getting that exercise you need to build a strong immune system? Are you checking in with people? We are creatures that need people to survive. Even though I'm an introvert, you still need people. And quality relationships are what are going to help us get through these difficult times. Do you feel safe? Do you feel heard? Do you feel connected? Are you managing your thoughts? I happen to be born with the anxiety gene. I'm a catastrophic thinker. I ruminate a lot. And can you check that rumination and say, okay, what's another story I can tell myself? I can avoid watching the news so I don't get crazy. I can keep myself occupied. And when I'm having my negative thoughts, I can remind myself about the things I can control and the things I can't control. Are you managing your life smartly? Having that routine? Are you, if you're spiritual, are you engaging in your spiritual practice or doing hobbies or taking that walk? And finally, I think we have to give ourselves the opportunity to forgive, because I don't know about you, but I have failed at my regulation attempts over the last couple of days. And I've had to just say to them, I'm sorry, and just start again. Lastly, what I want to say is that this is about, you have to think about what emotions you're experiencing, because not all emotions are created equal. Strategies are specific to the person. They're specific to our situation and relationship. And finally, there's no criterion of correctness. That's what makes this work very beautiful and also very difficult. It's not like 5 + 5 = 10. How we manage our emotions is all about who we are. It's about the feeling, and it's about our relationship and our culture and background. So my last slide is the following. Give yourself and everyone you love, and even the people you don't love, the permission to have all their feelings. Remember, emotion regulation is not about not feeling. It's about accepting our feelings and using them wisely. Try to become that emotion scientist and not the emotion judge. Remember that physical distance does not mean psychological distance. Appreciate that developing these skills is hard work. It's complex. Just embrace the complexity. Don't be overwhelmed by it. Try to be that role model. And finally, I will argue that it is our moral obligation, especially in these times of crisis, to support children with healthy emotion regulation strategies, which means that it is our moral responsibility as the adults who are raising and teaching kids to be positive role models. And on that note, Claire, I hope I didn't go over too much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. No, you were perfect. Your overrun was absolutely within the limits allowed. And the comments were awesome. One that struck my mind, thank you for leading with vulnerability. We all know the title of the book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And I think that example of leadership, when people can really speak from the really shitty experiences they may have encountered and what they've learned and how they've built themselves from that, is truly inspiring. So
Thank
we
you.
have about 6-8 minutes just for us to chat.
Sure.
Now, you focused very much into the individual and the self-regulatory. You talked about
Correct.
our emotions as adults, those of children being out of balance, and more broadly that school climates, virtual or otherwise, are also out of balance. So I
Correct.
wanted to take you as my first question out to the macro. We can
Okay.
see how fragile that social fabric is around us. The world is out of balance right now. It was before. COVID is bringing that into even sharper relief. And many of the comments online have been around the lack of equity.
Yes.
I think that we're seeing COVID in that sense as a threat multiplier. Many of us are working in situations where we see conflict risk at the societal level, the urban level, is going up very sharply. And therefore, the question, you talked about systemic change. I would like to draw you out a little bit at that
Please.
more macro environmental level to think about how we focus on resilience at that broader level, thinking about embracing complexity and how what we on this call and with our institutions and networks can do to try and take some of the smarts of your thinking there out to leaders beyond education, to community structures, to deal with COVID as threat multiplier and the underlying causes of inequity and exclusion as well. So over to you. Small question.
I know. I thought, do we have 6 hours? I think what you're bringing up is something that is so important because, our work is always built in what we call a bioecological model. The child is who we care about. We want them to grow into this healthy human being to make a difference in the world. And there's so many systems around that child, from parents to schools to community to state policies to government policies. And I think the most important thing in what you're getting at is that we really have to examine the policies in our countries, in our nations, in our education systems. Are they focused on healthy development of children or not? And I think you just got to step back and say, let's be honest. For example, I'll give you the one personal to me around bullying. So kids who are bullied horrifically, which is a big problem in America, we have about a third of our nation's children are bullied. If you look at the policies around bullying, first, there's no real federal policy. So children are not really seen as needing to be protected as people. And when you examine the policies that do exist at the state or local levels, they're usually about protecting schools from being sued by families. They're not really about supporting children. So that's just my one example of saying, how do we take a step back and really make sure that we are creating a society through which the lens is about ensuring all children get an equitable education?
Yep. But let me draw that out. So
Please.
one of my favorite questions is who? Two questions. Who don't you know how to talk to? Or where do we not get return on our current investments, whether that's research, policy traction, advocacy, you name it. So I would be interested to tease out, you've been in the space a long time, who are you finding are the hardest constituencies to reach in terms of leading to that broader shift in the policy and attitude ecosystem?
Well, I have to be careful what I say because this is being recorded, but more conservative politicians, tend to be resistant to this because they don't like the idea of having systems that are about, you know, an individual child growing up in a healthy way. And I find that problematic. And so if we are in a situation where we have, like here in America, we've got all the 50 states, and we've got red and our blue states, and we can see that the red states, unfortunately, are less likely to adopt these practices, and there's more resistance to them. Some people think it's social engineering. So to me, what really has to happen is that we have to educate policymakers on the science, because this is not a color situation. This is a data situation, that how kids feel and how they deal with their emotions is driving their success in life to a large extent. It's not about you have to learn my values, right? We're going to separate values from actual skill development. And I think there's confusion, that we're trying to push an agenda. And I think that's not correct. That's an improper way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm. It can also, of course, be a get-out clause. It's very easy to label something as an agenda and give it an ideological slant as an excuse for not taking action. One final question, as I'm conscious of time. You talked about the survey, and one of the questions coming up was, is there one, or could there be one for students? And can that be done at a much broader level to give that sense of exchanging moods, exchanging that permission to feel, and make that more broadly visible? Is that something that you've looked at Yale or with other partners?
So getting student data has been more difficult during these times because, we used to go to schools to collect data, and now we'd have to go out to families, and it's complex. I think if we were studying college students or high school students, it would be easier. And I will say that, well, I don't have the capacity to necessarily manage all the interest in this, but if Dominic and you, Claire, were interested and people reached out to you and said, we have access to youth, I will be very happy to support a research project to internationally to support understanding the emotional lives of children. I'm passionate about that and would be delighted to participate.
That's a fantastic moment to end this first part of the webinar, that call to action. And the chat is going to allow us to get other ideas coming in from the group, which I really welcome. I will finish, apart from thanking you, Mark, for your expertise, your humanity, your willingness to share so openly, with my own personal reflection. I have 3 children in close succession, brought up in the French system, one acutely bullied. And I think that this idea of permission to feel goes so much to the heart of what it is to be a parent as well, and how you understand how to bring children out of trauma in different ways. So this empathy and humanity that characterizes how WISE is approaching this topic is something that moves me at a personal level very deeply.
Thank you.
Mark, thank you. I know everybody.
Thank you so much for including me. I feel both privileged and honored to be a part of the conference, and I look forward to our next collaboration. So fantastic. Enjoy the conference, everyone, and thank you.
Thank you. Dominic, I'm going to pass back over to you, and thank you everybody for your great questions all the way through this first segment.
Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. And Mark, thanks very much indeed for that. There was an unbelievably, you'll see when you finish speaking how rich the chat was in the side while you were talking, and how much activity there's been on Twitter during this. It's my great privilege now to introduce the next part of the program. We're going to hear from 3 really interesting thinkers and leaders talking about work in different contexts. Each of them is going to speak for about 10 minutes, and please continue to post questions and comments in the chat function. And then when each of them has had the chance to share their presentations and their reflections, we will have a brief discussion between the 4 of us. So first of all, we're going to hear from Nadine Trépanier-Bisson, who's the Director of Professional Learning at the Ontario Principals Council in Canada. We'll then hear from Lorenzo Bonussi, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at Fondazione per la Scuola in Italy. And finally, we'll hear from Mohammed El Idrissi, who's the CEO and co-founder of Teach for Morocco. And Mohammed's going to talk both about the work that Teach for Morocco have been involved in and also the wider Teach for All initiatives to support teachers and students and school leaders during the current crisis. So Nadine, can we hand over to you, and you have 10 minutes or thereabouts to take us through your presentation.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. All right, so thank you for the invitation to share some of what we're doing in Ontario, Canada. As Dominic mentioned, I'm the Director of Professional Learning at the Ontario Principals Council. So I believe a lot of you will know this, but in Canada, the education portfolio is a provincial. So there is not a national response to the crisis. Where education is concerned, each province is doing their own response. And while this does look similar province to province, there are some differences. So I'm only going to speak for Ontario and what OPC is doing. And I want to start, as we usually do, with a land acknowledgement for where I am currently coming to you from North York near Toronto. I would like to acknowledge the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on the lands on which I work today. I acknowledge that North York is the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, Haudenosaunee, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13. I thank the past, present, and future caretakers of this land where age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation, and renewal took place. I am grateful to have the opportunity to work and learn on these lands in a community of sharing. And then just to kind of give you a brief overview of what's happened in Ontario, specifically to education over the past few weeks. So on March 12th, the week before March break, so the Thursday before March break, the government announced that schools would be closing March 14th through till April 5th. So school boards had only a day, really the Friday, to get some messaging out to parents and students and teachers about what would this look like. And then they had some time during March break, while most were supposed to be on vacation, to come up with some preliminary plans and solutions. And then on March 31st, it was announced that schools were to remain closed through till May 4th, and that phase 2 of learning at home would commence. Phase 1 had been the ministry providing through an online portal some exercises or ideas of how parents could keep up with their activities, educational activities for their children. But phase 2 was now involving teachers and ensuring that students and teachers had the resources they needed. So I don't have to go into everything that you can imagine, the complexities of ensuring that students had appropriate access to technology or even to Wi-Fi. We do have some areas in the province, especially in the north, where that is not a given. And so people have been really creative in finding solutions to get that to students, but we are definitely not there yet. And not everyone has access, though we are well on our way. And then finally, yesterday, the ministry announced that schools will not reopen May 4th. We don't have a date yet of when the reopening will happen. And so that's causing some uncertainty, a lot of anxieties for principals and vice principals, school leaders more generally, and system leaders who are trying to cope with all of this. And yesterday, I had the opportunity to speak to someone who reminded me that often our school leaders are dealing with crisis. Dealing with crisis is not new for school leaders. However, oftentimes they are not directly involved as part of the crisis. They are not having to deal with their own issues resulting directly from the crisis. However, in this case, they are also physical distancing. They are also at risk when they go out to do groceries or essential sorry, I don't have the word in English, essential things that they need to get done, like doctor's appointments or groceries, things like that. And they have their children at home. They may have parents or neighbors who depend on them for care as well. So they are very much living this crisis at the same time as they are trying to be the supportive voice and the supportive presence for staff and students and parents. And so OPC, the Ontario Principals Council, our members consist of about 5,600 or so principals and vice principals in public schools in Ontario. There are other principal associations here and we work closely with them, but I'm going to speak directly about what we've been doing to support our members. So we do have weekly meetings. So we have some staff members, we call them professional services consultants, and they do have weekly meetings with people, with representatives of each of the school districts to allow us to check in, to understand what's going on in the field and to react appropriately if we need to on a more broad basis. We do have one-on-one support. So this is a continuation of what we are already offering, where if people are having professional issues, they can call in, and we do adhere to a program called Starling Minds for any of our members who need a little bit more support from an emotional perspective or a social perspective. We collaborate with partners. We've increased that collaboration, though it was already present before, other principals associations, superintendents, directors, even reaching out to teacher federations to work together. And then finally, we've had ongoing professional learning since April 1st. So what we did when the school closures were announced, we sent out a survey to all of our members. It was prepared during March break, sent out immediately after. We had an overwhelming rate of response, and we used that to plan some professional learning. So we identified first 4 different formats. We have workshops, webinars, discussions, and book clubs. And then we found some facilitators, we built a schedule, and we launched on April 1st. And the topics are what you see on the left of the screen. So we have online leadership during the crisis. So we've had some specific offerings that have dealt with online learning, holding virtual staff meetings, for example. We have some that are about pedagogy, that are around how we can get at strong pedagogy during this crisis, during what we're calling emergency remote teaching, because this is not online learning, it is emergency remote teaching. And some of the pedagogy workshops that we've held are also to bring it further and deeper for when things get back to a new normal. And then some management pieces around special education or teacher performance appraisals and things like that, building equity into what we're doing now and beyond. And we've also have some workshops and a specific series to help principals deal with their own self-care, which we've added. This is just a screenshot to show you a little bit about what we've done for our principals. That's the landing page. And actually these just-in-time professional learning offerings are actually open to any leaders in Ontario or elsewhere that would want to register. The self-care ones are for our members only, but this broader piece is available to anyone with registration. So far, we've had 1,073 registrants. Each session ranges with between 50 and 200 people. So we are looking to keep going. And I've just wanted to share a couple of pieces of reactions from some of our members as they've shared with us. It was great to hear all of the key messages, and I especially appreciated the emergency remote teaching message. I think we can forget that we were not ready or planned for this time, and everyone, teachers included, want to keep our students engaged and learning, but there are many other factors that are affecting our students, families, and ourselves. And then a few others. This was awesome, incredible, need to watch this again, and then feel upon reflection. That would be more appropriate feedback here. This was concrete and gave me some awesome ways to support this in our schools. Thank you. Really enjoyed the group discussion. It helped my well-being to connect with my colleagues outside my board. Recommend these sessions continue. I think all the information, when I was able to be present, was relevant to our roles as leaders and how we respond during a pandemic that is affecting our staff, students, and families. Thank you. And as I conclude, I just wanted to share what our next steps are as part of our work. We will continue to provide those one-on-one supports and access to the Starling Minds program. We are continuing our daily professional learning offerings. We're adding topics, but we're also digging deeper on some places where the comments from participants have been that they would like to take one piece of it and go a little bit further in the thinking and in the learning. We are going to put on more discussions to allow people to share what they're going through, how they're feeling, how they're dealing with things, strategies that they've been able to put in place to support themselves, to support staff, to support students, and to support the efforts of the community in general. And of course, we'll be open to feedback as we move through the process. And I think, Dominic, that's it for me. I have not monitored the chat though while I was speaking, but that concludes, and my contact information are just on my last slide here.
Nadine, thank you very much indeed. The chat has been very positive about what you were sharing, and you could see that your experiences in Ontario were resonating with people in many different countries around the world. What we're going to do is move on to Lorenzo now, and looking forward to hearing his presentation. And after Lorenzo, we'll hear from Mohammed, and then depending on time, we'll hopefully have time to address some of the questions that have come up in the chat, which are pertinent to all three of your presentations. So Lorenzo, over to you.
Hello everybody. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here, and it's also extremely interesting to listen to all the experience around the world. And I will share my desktop so I can project my presentation. Okay, I will try to stay in 10 minutes, and I will briefly introduce the project we are running in Italy, and then to explain how we react to the crisis, and then just to suggest some tips or just to tell some experience we collect in this period of time. So I'm the Chief Innovation Officer of Fondazione per la Scuola, which is running a Riconnessioni project that is one of the largest and most comprehensive action for education, digital education and innovation in Europe. It basically boosts fiber optic broadband connectivity in school from 50% to 90%, 50% is the average at the national level. It involves more than 60% of the teachers in the teacher training program. It's a private and public project, so it merges funds coming from public and private company, and promotes a new model for digital pedagogy based on the combination of creativity, innovation, and inclusion. The numbers are quite high. We are working with more than 400 schools in northwest of Italy, 100,000 students. We trained almost 8,000 teachers in different pathways of professional development. We involved more than 4,300 students in an evaluation of the impact of the project, and the general investment is 10 million euro. We're working with the public Ministry of Education, both at national and regional level. And the aim of Riconnessioni are basically two. The first regards innovation of space and time of teaching and learning, and fostering new competence in schools. That basically means supporting professional development of teachers. And the second one develops a new model for internet connectivity for schools, allowing them to deliver personalized and interactive learning. That it's basically, we are building a new broadband network for schools. So in this context, the COVID-19 explodes, the crisis exploded in Italy. As today, schools in Italy have been closed for 5 weeks. And it's not only in Italy, but it's all around the world. And the situation is it's very difficult. And as now there was more than 20,000 deaths in Italy because of the pandemic. The reaction of the government was from the beginning, the Italian government, of course, closed the school. It provided quite quickly, in a couple of weeks, some fundings for schools in order to foster the procurement of digital technology, particularly for the most vulnerable students. And the ministry and the minister in general required teachers to continue teaching remotely since the beginning. So the message from the center was clear: teachers need to have to keep teaching in using digital technology. In these 5 weeks of school closure, the data we have are that 90% of schools have launched remote learning programs, but they vary greatly from homework sent by email or just a voice message on mobile phone, for example, to more sophisticated online learning pathway. And we have a huge variety of solutions that it's problem actually. But as the data we have from our schools and in general in Italy, 15%, 20% of students are not participating in online school because a vary of motivation, lack of internet connection, lack of device, or lack of support from family that basically are in great difficulty with using technology. So how we reacted to this crisis? Fondazione per la Scuola, True Riconnessioni, launched a rich program of webinars, so web seminar for teachers, but featuring teachers. So webinar held by teachers that talk and suggest a solution to other teacher trainers and teachers, providing a platform for idea crowdsourcing and dissemination. We wanted to face the crisis and use it as an opportunity for reflection, collaboration, and growth. That's one, the main motivation. But the second one that was even more important is that webinars are only partly about online learning per se. The main objective is to foster togetherness and collaboration within the educational community. So we felt clearly the need to stay together, to talk together, and to share our experience in teaching, but also our worry and our fears. And in fact, the webinar were very successful. We had almost 4,000 people participating, 40,000 people participating in 25 webinars with more than speakers. And what is relevant, I think, and surprised me is that every day more than 1,500 people were connected to our community in order to stay together to learn how to face the crisis. And what we learned, some tips, some ideas, some suggestions, both for ed teachers, from and for ed teachers, and from teacher to teachers. So the first one is communication. The communication is very important, and we suggest to ed teacher to put procedures in place both for formal and for empathetic communication. So, and the official channel just sending clear message about what's going to happen to the school and to the kids, but from the other side also activate some direct communication to teacher to kids in order to monitor and help the most difficult situation. The second things we learned was about pedagogy. Don't improvise. Don't use unknown and super innovative method if you never used before. Step by step, adopt the necessary technology and focus on redefining the program, because in Italy too, as in Canada, probably schools are not going to be open until, so basically the year's already finished. And so we have to reimagine the whole programs. And then a specific focus on inclusion. It's one of our main interests because we are a philanthropic foundation. And some basic tips are leverage the equipment you already have in school. So give the computer you have in school to the family that that cannot buy the computer, they don't have it. Involve local charities and NGO and other organizations in order to monitor the situation and help the single problem, and stay informed on what is happening in every class. So we notice that good head teachers have a great control on what's happening in all the different situations. Then for teacher, what we learned is from instrument, experiment first, okay, it's fine, but then select one complete platform, possibly that is compliant with the law. In Europe, we have the GDPR that is very strict on privacy and on other requirements for platforms. So not all the platforms are the same. There are some that are more legal, so to say, at least in Italy. Activity, work on teacher-student relationship since the beginning. So it's very important not losing the relationship. So using online chat, being seen, watching the expression and also the haircut of your kids, for example. Adopt new routines. So online courses are good, as we see in schools, because it puts a new routines that is necessary, provided that family are really under stress. So it's necessary to be very careful, but new routines are important also for the most difficult cases. And develop new methods. That's almost obvious, but it's difficult to replicate the classic lecture online. It's much more better to use a new approach like flipped classroom, project-based learning, or collaborative learning. Then the third main point is the evaluation, because teachers need to, at the end of the year, put a mark on kids. And then what we see that it's working in use collaborative methods and evaluate through projects that can compose at the end of this crisis a portfolio for each student that can be evaluated at the end of the year, even if you don't have a test or other instrument for the evaluation. Just a simple tip of an ideal lecture is just send a video in order to raise the attention of the kids, start a discussion, help them to have an individual study that can be also in group, and then launch project and evaluate collaborative. I'm just finished with the last slide. That is about some big question we are asking ourselves. I want to share with you that collaboration with teacher, and that teacher is providing us with valuable insight into which approach school are finding helpful. But there are left at least three big questions that are known unknowns. The first one is about how can we find out more about the extent to which school closure are impacting the disadvantaged students. That's the main point, I think. How can we direct our effort toward action which will maintain their relevance and value when schools are opening again? For example, in Italy, we are investing a lot of money in buying new computers, but it's not necessarily good. I'm not sure about that. Or at least we need to find a way to be an investment and not just an expense. And what can we do starting from now to make sure that whoever has lost progress because of school closure can get back on track once schools are open again? And in Italy, now we think in September. That's all. Thank you. I hope to.
Lorenzo, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. And my goodness, your organization has achieved so much in such a short time and in incredibly challenging circumstances. So
it was a very stressful and intense period of time.
I can imagine. We're going to turn, before we get into the conversation, we're going to turn to Mohammed and hear about the work that he's been leading in Morocco and the wider work of Teach for All. And then I hope we'll have time for a couple of questions to the three of you at the end. So Mohammed, over to you, and welcome.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you, WISE and SGS, for providing this great platform where we can share inspiring ideas to improve the education system during this difficult time. I'm Mohammed Idrissi, the CEO and co-founder of Teach for Morocco. In 2019, Teach for Morocco has become Teach for All's 50th partner and global network first partner in North Africa. Teach for Morocco is an independent non-profit organization that recruits and develops promising graduates and young professionals to affect change in the countries under-resourced schools and communities.
Mohammed, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Would you like to share your screen so we can see your slides, or would you like us to do that?
Also.
Otherwise, I'm happy to do it from this end, and you can just talk me through when you want to advance the slides.
Give me 1 second, please. I'm just trying to. Okay. Sorry, can you open it from your side?
Yeah, of course.
Perfect. Just yeah. That's great. So, Teach for Morocco is an independent non-profit organization that recruits and develops promising graduates and young professionals to affect change in countries and resource schools and rural communities, to work toward improving education equity in Morocco, both inside and outside the classrooms. So we are working in partnership with the Ministry of Education, with the regional councils, with municipalities. Moreover, we are working very closely with the parents' associations and civil society in order to ensure a high level of collective leadership approach that Teach for All has. So our motto, as I said, is, can you move to the second slide, please? Yeah, thank you. Our approach is to recruit and to select the national diverse promising future leaders and to train them during this summer training period. And after that, we place our fellows in the schools where we have the agreement with the Ministry of Education, especially in the low-income communities and the rural communities. And during these 2 years of commitment that we have with these teachers, we are going to develop and support them in order to work together with community members and with families and with local leaders towards a shared vision. So we cultivate a long-term collective also leadership with alumni after the 2 years when they graduate. So, and after that, we have what we call a shared and adapt solutions. So we are sharing and providing a global platform of Teach for All with all the teachers around the world. We are 53 countries working together and sharing solutions and adapting on the local levels. So we share and provide global platforms for staff and teachers around the world, communicate all over the country and the world, provide all children education support and opportunities to fulfill their potential. Yeah, next slide, please. So I say to Teach for All, we are working here as a one team in the global team. So we are 53 countries, as I said. We are the first country in North Africa. So in the first case of COVID, COVID-19 that appeared in Morocco in March 2nd, the government have decided to close all the schools and universities in the country. What we did as Teach for Morocco, we have decided to get connected with our global network, Teach for All, and in order to figure out, especially with the MENA region, Teach for All MENA region, to figure out how we can find plans and strategies in order to work and to be able to find any platforms or etc. So as I said before, the Ministry of Education, they closed the schools, but in the same time they have tried to open e-learning opportunities to the students through TV platforms and radio channels, and also they have educational platforms in the internet. But also Teach for Morocco, they have decided to work from our global network, which is Teach for All, in order to see how we can get insights from our global partners about how to communicate first internally between staff and teachers, and how to communicate externally during this time of COVID-19. So teachers, after getting informed globally from different countries, especially from the countries who have been affected, like Teach for China and Teach for Italy and Spain, they got informed and they were so quickly to act locally during this period here in Morocco. So what we did, we divided our groups into 3 geographical areas. We have a group of teachers who are going to work with students and parents in the urban centers where they have the internet access, and they have also the technologies and the materials to teach and participate with the parents in this region geography. And the second cluster and geography are the teachers who are going to work with the students and parents who are living in the rural areas, but they have difficulties in terms of internet access. They are using just their smartphones or WhatsApp in order to communicate. The third category, which was the most, the toughest one, are the ones who are living in the rural areas, and they are working without the internet. They don't have even the smartphones. They don't have any materials to use in order to be able to communicate with their teachers. So we have tried to divide the teachers into 3 groups in order to find solutions on each group. If you go to the next slide, you're going to see some pictures of WhatsApp solutions that our teachers have done during this period with their students, of early childhood students. So all these students you can see here, they are living in the rural areas. And I can show you a story here of our fellow Youssef, who shared these nice pictures of his students. First time when he started connecting with our students and parents, he found some challenges and difficulties to communicate with parents in these areas. In the culture, the mindset, and many other reasons that and he was unable to convince in the beginning to let the parents to communicate and participate with their students in these regions. But after what he did, Youssef, he starts communicating and trying to work together with society civil and with the parent association to convince them about the importance of this period. And we have to work with to convince the parents and to find the problems where they have the problem. They have problems in the internet access, in the materials, in the smartphones, or they have just parent association, they have provided solutions to some parents with recharge or prepaid internet during their smartphones in order to use the WhatsApp and to work directly with the teacher Youssef. He started with 4 students, now he is in 24 students. So he covered all his students in this area. And I would like to move to the next example. The next slide is about the SMS solutions, was one of the solutions that we have provided in this period, difficult period. Our fellow, like Asma, she's trying to communicate with parents, but they say to her, okay, we don't have time to work with our kids. We are so busy, and it's really difficult for them to organize the time in which they can start teaching their kids and to how they can collaborate with parents. So our fellows now, they are working together both with teachers. Teachers, they are working both with students and parents, not just like before when they were just in the classrooms. So this is something different and new for them. So they have to work on pedagogical and methodologies and the student outcomes. And in the meantime, they have to increase their leadership skills and communication skills with their parents and to convince them how they can organize themselves during this period to participate with them. So this is an example of a platform, an SMS platform that Teach for Morocco have created in order to send SMS to the parents' phone members, and they ask them with a small message, please click on this link in order to go directly to the lesson or to the video that has been made by our fellows. And they specify the time after they finish all their work in the house, like parents when they are working in the house. So what they do, they say, for example, at 3 p.m., please click on this link. Watch this video with your kids. Try to do this workshop. And I'm going to follow up with you after in the WhatsApp. It worked very well, and it was really great idea because we have succeeded to convince many other parents to join this solution, and not just the students and parents who are working working directly with teachers in the classrooms, but the external students who are now didn't have this chance to learn, to keep learning from home. So they start calling our teachers to include them in this service. The next slide is about another example about web TV that we have created in our websites that includes a weekly videos of lessons that each of our fellows is trying to share on daily basis or on weekly basis. We have the Monday and a lesson that we have to share about TV. So it's make it easy for parents and also students to organize themselves, and they don't have to upload or to download any video via their WhatsApp. They go just directly to the web TV, and it will be easy for them to find all what they need in terms of. So this is an example of what we have done just during this 4 weeks of time. I can say that we are trying to create like more initiatives during the coming few days with the third groups who are the ones who don't have internet access and they don't have smartphones. So this is another challenge that our fellows are trying to work. So finally, I would like just to end that one thing that became clearer to us is that during this period, the work that we are doing is tremendous, has a tremendous purpose, and this global pandemic cannot be solved just by individual leaders. It requires all of us to work together in order to put the collective over the individual. So this is what our global network is always trying to do in its work, and for that reason we are convinced to work with what we are doing is more important now than before. So to help each other and to be with each other more than any time before. Thank you so much.
Mohammed, thank you so much for that. That was another really rich presentation, and that kind of triage approach of tailoring the intervention to help different communities was definitely resonating with a lot of people on the chat. We're slightly past time, but I would like to ask one question to all three of you. And Nadine, if you wouldn't mind answering first, and then Lorenzo, and then Mohammed. And if you'd keep your answers fairly brief, please. But I'm really interested to hear, because the difference in the innovations that you've all been talking about in the approaches is fantastic, and the speed with which you've been able to deploy them. And I'm really interested to hear whether you're already seeing unexpected advantages to these kinds of modality in terms of how you engage with teachers or head teachers or school principals, or how you're supporting learning taking place over the more traditional bricks and mortar, all the students in a classroom together approach.
Thanks, Dominic. I think that one of the advantages that we're already seeing is just the accessibility of the professional learning and the ways that people are able to come together to be creative facilitators for online, and finding ways for it to be interactive, where perhaps before we thought more of online learning as static and sit and get. We have some facilitators who are doing a really great job of making it interactive with different tools that are available. So I think that that's one. And the other one would be the ability to archive all of these great resources and allow people to look through them and sift through them afterwards if they haven't been able to attend, that way reaching a lot more people.
Great, thank you. Lorenzo.
I think that the good part of the story is that the crisis shows the passion of teachers, and it stressed them a lot, and then they reacted so quickly, and that was remarkable. And so they learned the things that never learned before in a couple of weeks. We notice that there are some advantage in adapting innovative method like flipped classroom, for example, or laboratory teamwork, and also some good result on special needs. For example, kids with dyslexia are helped by using computers that probably never used before. But that's only a part of the story, because the other part of the story is that this online things is not school. There is no relation, there is no emotional context, there is nothing that it's really that can be defined on schools. So a big push in innovation, but still a big worry on the future, I think.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Mohammed, the same question to you.
Yeah, what comes in my mind now is that our fellows, our teachers, they are working extra hours than before in terms of the way how they manage themselves, in terms of communicating with parents and engaging them to participate with their kids and with the students. So this requires leadership skills and communication skills that will allow them to and give them this kind of power and motivations in order to be able to work with the situation. And in terms of innovation, we are trying to get feedbacks from our teachers on daily basis by organizing meetings with them and to following up all their feedbacks through what they are getting as the experience on the local level. Let's say that the rural areas is different from the urban in terms of the challenges that they are facing. So we should put our teachers that are considered the future leaders at the center of our thinking, in order to give them they are in the front line right now in this spirit. So they are doing a great job. So we should appreciate all what they are doing and all providing to us.
Thank you very much. Three unsurprisingly really thoughtful and interesting reflections on how the scale of the crisis is also accelerating innovation and will have a significant impact, I think, on how education systems reconvene and this idea of a new normal emerges afterwards, because everyone is learning new skills incredibly rapidly at the moment. You can see from the comments in the chat that your 3 presentations were enormously well received and have been greatly appreciated by everyone on the webinar. I'd like to add my thanks to all of you, and thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and insights in this first phase of reaction to the COVID-19 crisis. What we're going to do now is take a short break, and we will reconvene on the hour, which is 7 o'clock if you're in Europe. So use this time to get a drink, get some tea or coffee, stand up and have a stretch. It's difficult when you're sat at a computer all the time. Remember some of the things that Mark said in the opening keynote about being kind on ourselves and making sure that we're mindful in this difficult time. And we will see you all back for the second half of this, which will be another incredibly rich series of discussions. So see you back here in about 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Hi, Beatrice.
Oh, hello.
Mhm.
Hi, Tony. How are you?
How are you?
Okay.
Good.
I didn't know you could see me yet.
You just came up on my screen. So
Okay. All is well
how's
with
life? How's life in Paris?
it's all right. Confinement. But luckily we can go out for walking and sports, so it's all right.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
we have
Paris,
we have the same regime in Melbourne where exercise is encouraged. So that's a godsend. Yep.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. But the best, it's been quite sunny in Paris, which it never is. So it's quite unique. It's always raining this time of year, and this time since confinement, it's been really, really sunny. So we even saw ducks walking around in the Rue du Bac
Yes.
the other day. So
It's the whole thing is surreal. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I'm sorry I missed you the other night. I somehow managed to have my calendar showing a 12 midnight gathering tonight rather than last night. So anyway, I've caught up. Yep.
but where are you actually?
I'm in Melbourne at the moment.
In Melbourne right now.
Yeah. So it's early. It's
So we're
early
going to
hours.
mute. Okay, so
Yep.
the
Okay.
speakers are not muted.
Okay. I'll catch you soon.
So welcome back, everybody. Thank you for rejoining us. I hope you will have the chance to get a drink or have a walk and a stretch and refuel. I'm really happy now to introduce Tony Mackay, who's going to be our moderator for the this amazing panel discussion which is coming up, which is going to be fantastic, I think. So Tony, over to you.
Dominic, thank you very much. I hope I'm coming through loud and clear. Let me just check on that first. Good, thank you. Well, colleagues, welcome to what I think is going to be a remarkable panel conversation, obviously in the spirit of the theme of this, our first day, where we are really focusing upon the disruption that is taking place. And for this panel, as a previous panel, we wish to focus upon the role of education leaders at this time of global crisis. And I'm delighted to be joined by Augustine, Daniela, and Beatrice, who are colleagues who are in their respective jurisdictions, geographies, and roles and responsibilities at the moment, leading work that is quite remarkable. And just before I asked them to briefly introduce themselves, and the definition of brief is about 30 seconds, let me just say that in this session, there'll be really two parts. The first, we're going to ask each of our panel members to say something about their current experiences and the way in which they are leading endeavours that are quite remarkable and a response to the current crisis. In the second round, I'm going to ask them a little more about the nature of leadership and explore it more deeply. And then, as you know, as we come to the community conversation, we'll have the chance to pick up on some responses from a variety of our wider global community that's engaged in this conversation today and come back to them for their comments. So 2 parts in the panel followed by the community conversation. But just to set the scene, and before I ask each of our panel members to respond to the challenge that we've put before them, Augustine, could you just introduce yourself and say a word about your role, your place, and in the space of about 30 seconds, just also tell us how you're feeling at the moment, just so we check in with each other emotionally as well. So, Augustine, let me start with you.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. Do you hear me all right over there?
Loud and clear.
Okay, then my name is Agustin Pardo. I'm the founder and CEO at Ox. It's an edtech startup that provides students, teachers, parents, school leaders with a gamified adaptive learning platform for kids between 3 and 14 years of age. The platform is called Woombox. And regarding your question about how am I feeling, I would say relaxed. I'm one of those individuals that discovered yoga during this crisis. So I did a session before this started and I'm ready to roll, let's say.
That is wonderful. Thank you very much. Does a glass of wine count as the equivalent of a yoga session?
I'm no expert, but I would say yes.
Great, that's good. Then I've done a yoga session. That's wonderful. Thank you. Daniela, could you do the same and introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for this invitation. It's an honor to be here. I am Daniela Labra. I am the General Director of Atentamente. We're a Mexican nonprofit. Our aim is to bring tools for well-being for everybody. We think that we can change the world from the inside out. And we have worked extensively in the educational domain within social and emotional learning. So we have developed nationwide curriculum, and we have done professional training, both in person for around 20,000 teachers and online for around 200,000 teachers, all within the realm of social and emotional learning to really give people tools for their own inner well-being, emotional well-being.
And Daniela, given that this is absolutely your space, how would you capture your own emotional well-being at the moment?
I think it was funny when Agustin was speaking, I was like, oh, maybe I'm just blanking out. I'll forget about everything I was going to say. So I felt a little surprised and a little nervous, but actually that's fine. There's no problem for me with that. I feel really honored and happy, actually.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Beatrice, coming to us from Paris, where I know the sun is shining. Just do a quick introduction and let us know how you're feeling.
Yes, you can see the fake background that I have with the Eiffel Tower behind. My name is Beatrice Pont, and I'm Senior Education Policy Analyst at the OECD. And I work on the area of school leadership and also in supporting countries with the implementation of their education policy reforms. So I work with many different countries. I work with Mexico. I'm now working with Norway, with Austria, Estonia, with Ireland, Scotland, with many different education systems. And it's a fascinating job, actually, to learn so much from so many countries and to be able to be in the field and really know what is happening out there. And I could say I'm feeling, as Mark Brackett would say, yellow. He coded us in colors before and showed us. And yellow, and also very, the time, I'm very much about using knowledge and evidence, and we don't have any now. And it's very difficult to make decisions or to know what to say when you don't have data or an understanding, a real understanding of what's going on out there. So this is why I particularly value this seminar, because it's an opportunity to hear and to see in the webinar chat what's happening in all these countries, because we haven't done a lot of surveys. It's action. Everybody's taking actions now in Easter holiday in the last weeks. So this is a great opportunity to exchange, to think about further, refine my thinking about what needs to happen in countries and how we can contribute.
Thank you, Beatrice. Yeah, exactly. I think we're feeling the same way. There's a wonderful opportunity to capture this incredible global activity in real time. I do think we want to acknowledge, obviously, WISE and Salzburg for the way in which they're able to curate this remarkable aggregation of activity that's taking place. I mean, also other bodies, UNESCO, OECD itself has been providing fantastic reports on a regular basis. So I think we're feeling well connected. But here's a chance to go deeply into 3 quick case studies. So Augustine, can I start with you, and you can model what is a 3 to 5 minute deep dive into your activity, Augustine, and I'll be gentle with a reminder with 1 minute to go. So I hope you won't find that discourteous if I just give you a quick reminder.
Of course not, Anthony. I'll do my best to keep into the time frame. But thanks for the opportunity. At Ox, we like to joke that we are a frontline edtech, because every day we like to spend our time working next to our community, working by hand with them. And the reason for this is the fact that the team that built Ox has worked for more than 10 years inside of every learning environment we were allowed to be, from, let's say, a Hagwon in South Korea to a rural school in the middle of the mountains in Argentina. So when the crisis came to our region, Latin America, we understood that there would be some profound transformations taking place in every fiber of our society, and we needed to prepare ourselves for it. We also understood that for education to be able to respond to the COVID crisis, there were 4 pillars, let's say, to take into account. The first one is human capacity. So we ask ourselves, are parents, educators, policymakers, and even students trained or have the tools to adapt and respond to this crisis? The second pillar is education policy and strategy. Are there laws and protocols to respond to this transformation at a short, mid, and long-term basis? And the answer is no. This is an unprecedented event. We weren't prepared for it. From one day to another, 150 million kids in Latin America stayed at home. The third point is enabling infrastructure. Our communities provided with the technology and the access to the internet in order to respond to these challenges, at least here in Latin America, but I would say that in every part of the world, access to this technology and to the internet is not a given, so it's quite challenging. And the fourth and last pillar, let's say, it's technology. Are there innovative solutions with proven results available for everyone? Some might say too many, and some might say too few. So basically, taking these 4 pillars into account, we knew there were things that we could change or adapt and things that we couldn't change, such as infrastructure. So we decided to take three actions. First, to respond really immediately. I'm talking about in less than 24 hours. The first one was to open our learning platform for free for everyone in order to ensure accessibility, so everybody could have access. The second one is that we started giving free training. In the last 3 weeks, we delivered more than 60 training sessions to more than 1,500 educators and school leaders, because we wanted to make sure that everyone had the tools to become a leader in their own role and in their own place in this new context. And the third and last measure that we took into account is to keep on providing free support. And I said something really important to our team. 1 of every 10 questions you will receive will be a technical question. The other 9 will require emotional support from your side. So we decided as a team that we were going to do everything in our power to provide with the tools we had at our disposal to ensure that every kid, parent, educator, school leader, government official could respond to the COVID crisis.
Brilliant. Austin, you just modeled the completely perfect intervention. So thank you. This puts a little bit of pressure on Daniela and Beatrice now. Daniela, let me give you the segue, because it just strikes me that the social and emotional intelligence that has been referred to by Augustine is something that is central to your work as well. So over to you.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it up. So for me, the first reflection, and I think really coming back through what Agustin was saying with human capacity. So I think this crisis has really brought to the forefront in a very lived way for each one of us, and I think for the education system and leaders, of course, that we really need emotional and social relational capacities that we don't have, and that we have not even touched in many cases and not addressed in education enough. So this is in the forefront, and it really gives the importance to something that's been talked about and tried to put there by the OECD and by education everywhere, but it's still not within the mainstream. And we can see the effects of this in our lives, in our homes, with our emotions, our relations, and in the education system. So I think what we can see now, and it's a great opportunity to hear, what is it that we would really need to learn now to help become, like Garcia Narvaez says, like, how do we educate to become human, to being a human, to be well with ourselves, with our emotions and our minds in our chambers, as Blaise Pascal said, on our own, but relating to others, and actually really understanding and integrating this interdependence that is so evident now. I mean, we're not alone, we're not separate, and not within humanity and not within the planet. So how do we really train for that? And we were discussing a little bit yesterday that when we talk about leadership, now leadership is being distributed in everyone. We're asking the kids, the parents, the teachers to be leaders, to know how to work with themselves, to organize themselves, to handle with what they're feeling, and to know how to connect while learning new tools and new ways and new schedules, new everything, right? So I think this is a point. So what we as Atentamente, what we have done to respond in the first instance of response has been taking care or helping people take care of themselves. As Mark very eloquently said this morning, allowing people to feel, now how can we give ourselves permission to feel and to handle what we're feeling, and that reactivity and the difficulty with our emotions. So what we have done is provided programs that we had, like jump into in-person programs, put them out there, a stress toolbox for adults. So a 16-hour session, 16-hour program that we've opened for free. And within this, we really want the adults to feel better, to know how to deal with stress that can be so useful, but is so painful or could be so painful right now. And we're also trying to give these messages on how to train certain aspects of our mind that are known by science to really help us with our well-being. So to have more calm and to be more calm, more kind, more clear, to relate better. So we're doing a campaign about that. We're doing online trainings for the kids because there is so little material, at least in Mexico, and I've seen it all over the web, so many things to do, so little about social emotional competence. So that would become more of the we really need to hear what the needs are in this very moment, like Beatrice said. And then in the midterm, we need to really bring this content that we've developed for years to the education system, which really lacks much of this professional training contents and curriculum for kids. So that's the next challenge. And also, as Agustin very well said, we have only in Mexico, for example, only 17% of the population has access to internet. So what do we do then? And how do we use what we've developed and really allow accessibility and equity in these things that tend to be left as secondary and actually are so integral to our humanity and to our survival? How do we develop well-being? And it's not being always in the yellow, happy, but internal resilience and a sense of purpose to whatever we encounter in our lives.
Daniela, let me just ask you this question, because there'll be some people listening who would say that across their education systems, but perhaps more so in pockets rather than in the mainstream, there's been an increasing focus on positive psychology. There has been a sense in which social and emotional intelligence has been on the curriculum, that mindfulness is now being spoken about, that we are moving into an AI world, and therefore in that AI world, quite apart from the pandemic, there is absolutely a concern about becoming more human. Mm-hmm. So how would you distinguish between what you see as being the signals, at least in some measure, of what you are calling for? How would you characterize that? That it's the beginning, it's inadequate, it's too superficial? What is your position on that?
I think there has been so much work in for a couple of decades now and excellent science around it. And I think in that way, it's not a beginning. But one of the things we know, for example, just from literature, is that just for this to be integrated, we need to understand its importance, right? And I think that understanding of importance of your inner world, right? And what you bring to the world with your own thoughts, with your own emotions, with your own actions, I think that has not been mainstreamed yet. And I really think that at this point, this is bang on our heads, right? It's like you could really use some emotional regulation. You could really know how to calm yourself. You could really use not being so reactive. We know how violence is incrementing in family violence is incremented enormously in these times, right? So I think that's in our face now, and I hope that could allow this big shift, saying, yeah, it sounds nice, and some people like it, and yeah. And Mark was saying people even think that we have agendas, to transform.
Yeah.
And it's actually we are all looking for well-being, and we should really address what are the causes of that well-being and how we can cultivate that well-being, because that's the search for all of us as humans, I think. And so we really need to bring that. So I think it's important. There's a lot of good information, but we still need to open to it and say, yes, it is important. We have to do something about it.
Understood. Beatrice, just before coming to you, let me just go back to Augustine for one moment, because when you talked about the importance of social and emotional intelligence in the rapid response to the challenges, and you talked about human capacity as being one of your pillars, Augustine, what's your own sense of the experience of this last couple of months? Do we have, in a sense, latent human capacity that if we know how to activate it, then we can tap into that force of social and emotional intelligence? We can generate the kind of well-being that is going to assist us as we think about this next period. What's been your own experience here?
Yes, I believe it's possible. I think it's something really challenging for most of us. I'm no expert in social emotional learning, and listening to you talk about this, it's really incredible to see how much I have to learn about it. I can talk about my own experience because 90% of our work is relating to people and working with people. And I think that this whole process has been going through different stages. And through those stages, there were different questions that were being done. It's sort of part of the process of denial, acceptance, and those kind of things. And I think that each one of us in their own role, kids by themselves, parents, teachers, and even school leaders, have had to make so many changes in such little time and cope with all that feeling that's happening. And I think Daniela has done something really great. Let's press pause, understand what we're feeling, accept it, and then move forward with those feelings. And I think that's some key aspect on considering that.
Thank you. And Beatrice, just as a connecting point for me, but please pick this up exactly where you want to take the story, but it strikes me that we have got leadership distributed across the whole of the learning and education system, and sometimes it's in particular communities and locations, but other leaders have got responsibility for what we might call whole systems. There are school principals, obviously, within their own communities. There are leaders of universities and of further and higher education, but there are also leaders who are occupying positions in ministries of education. They are taking decisions at the moment that affect the entire public education system in their geographies. I mean, this is a huge sense of responsibility. So I'm trying to also get a sense of the scale of the leadership challenge that we have. And I know that OECD, of course, is dealing with all of those levels, the variety of scales. So I'd be fascinated to hear how you are seeing the leadership challenge at this point.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Daniela and Agustin. For me, I think I focus on educational leadership. And as you were both saying, it's a moment of very complex change for education leaders, where it's just-in-time change without enough information and having to respond to the external health issues, social issues, and an economic context that's really changing. And so leaders, education leaders at the ministry, at the regional, at the system level, and at the school level have to make decisions that are very complex in a very short amount of time. And mainly there's the key issues are, on the one hand, school closures. So school closures mean that the physical school disappears, and with that, the school community. And I think this is what links to what you were talking about, Daniela, and about the well-being. When the community disappears, this collective sense of students disappears with it, and it's a very difficult challenge to embrace, I think, and that's one of the roles that leaders need to focus on. The second one is that learning is now being compensated by remote approaches. We've heard about e-learning, TV, radio, homeschooling. I've even heard of, and I think I've seen in the chat, where countries send the homework by courier in photocopies when people don't have e-learning or remote learning opportunities. The third area is accountability systems and how are students assessed, especially. This is a very big challenge for education systems, how to measure student progression. The fourth, and actually at the top, is what to learn. And do we focus on well-being? Do we limit the learning? What should kids be learning now? And what do we want them to know at the end of the year or next year? Do we choose to reduce the curriculum to focus on collaboration and well-being? Do we just stick to the same curriculum as before and try to move it online? So these are many of the issues that education leaders are grappling with, and they're very hard choices to make. The next is education professionals. All teachers and principals and others have to adapt to new ways of teaching and new ways of interacting with their students from their homes when they also have a very challenging environment to work in, because they also have families, they have to cook, clean, work. And on top of it, we're asking them to be, you know, the lifesavers of the children who are in school. So it's a very challenging situation that they're in. And finally, equities, inequalities, the system, this crisis is leading to a number of inequalities for the disadvantaged who don't have the capacity to connect, or who just fall out of the system because nobody's behind them to support them, who don't have the interest or the motivation to continue in this environment. So one of the issues that I was thinking about is, what is the role of school leaders, who are the ones who have to actually make this happen for children and for their schools? And at the heart, to me, is to build community, to bring coherence to the schools, to the learning in the schools, and to provide equity. And this means that in the face of school closures, which make, you know, they may end in May, they may come back, and what we'll see is having intermittent school closures coming back and forth, or only some groups of kids or others, or for one day. We don't know. The school leaders need to develop and maintain the school community throughout, so that kids feel part of the school, even though they are at home, so that parents feel that the school is supporting them and that they are a community. And this is done through leadership with vision, providing a shared vision, and with strong communication with the children, with the parents, and with the policymakers as well. The second very important role is, and I think Daniel was pointing to this, is to choose and maintain the appropriate remote approaches. The technical, so you have to have a clear technical approach for school to be supported during this time, and it needs to be simple. And I think this was said also in the previous panel as well. And the simpler, the better. And it needs to be consistent and coherent for that school. And, you know, I keep hearing about teachers finding their own networks. And if each teacher finds their own network in one school, the kids are going to be overwhelmed. They won't know which platform to go to. It's very difficult and challenging for the families and for the children to be able to have coherent learning. The third role is to develop the network of education professionals, to be able for all the teachers to share what they're teaching and how they're teaching and the way they're interacting. The fourth is to discuss the curriculum for their own school, see what it is that overall the school wants to deliver. And finally, to have equity, to be able to provide responses to the disadvantaged, either to partner with NGOs, to ask older students to help younger students who are more disadvantaged, to find solutions for the equity challenge. So I think that the role of school leaders in this time is more important than ever to support this community, the coherence of all these million of policy responses and technical tools that schools are receiving, that teachers are receiving, to make sure that they're coherent for the learning of their kids and to support equity. Thank you.
Beatrice, thank you. Let me just see if we can explore what I see to be a potential challenge here, and I'll put it in these terms, which probably make it more stark than I want it to be, but I want it to be a challenge for us. Augustine and Daniela, as I hear Beatrice speak, you could argue that if we've got strong community, and if we can build community, and if at the heart of that is the kind of, what was the language you used, I think, Daniela? A calmness, a kindness, and a clarity. Let's just say that those are the dimensions, the human capacities, the importance of well-being, if that's at the heart, and if leadership, to use your language, is distributed, then you might argue that we're in a strong position to be able to cope, not just cope, but to respond more adequately to the challenges. But I'm not sure whether, in fact, Augustine and Daniela, you're describing something which is the system, or is it your responses outside of the system that Beatrice has described? Because I'm trying to get a sense of how you are responding in a way. Augustine, I'll come to you first, because you made it clear that one of your pillars was to be very clear about current education policy and strategy, and indeed the other around enabling infrastructure, before you start to think about innovative solutions. So I'm trying to get a sense of how you are operating both within the system, but potentially also outside the system, and how the system can learn from the way in which you are both responding. Then I'll come back to Beatrice to ask her the question about, am I posing this in a way that is helpful or unhelpful? Because I take your point, Beatrice. We are talking about thousands of kids, right, in systems that are seriously being challenged, and their families right now. So help me out here, Augustine. What's your sense about my in-system, out-of-system distinction?
I would say, or I would argue, that we are all part of the system, not only school leaders and teachers or governments, but also students and parents. And at the same part, we're not part of the system. I know it's a complex answer to give, because in this context, you can find that every one of us, as a student, as a teacher, as a parent, as a school leader, as a government official, are taking proactive roles in leadership and how to take this further and to ensure equity and access to quality education. And at the same time, we have the real context. I can talk about Argentina, for example, and I would say that there's a lot of kids that don't have access to that system or formal system, so as to say, and they are being left behind because we don't have answers to give to them. So I think basically what I'm saying is that we need to find the answers not only inside the system per se, but also outside the system, and be very creative with those solutions. I think Lorenzo said some really amazing things. Mohammed also, for example, WhatsApp, when he talked about WhatsApp, here in Argentina, it's been an amazing tool to ensure that kids have access. And I think that there will be some really hard questions to answer. And we will have to be really sincere about how the system is responding to this, and if the system is really up to the task. I think that's a very difficult question to answer.
Augustine, let me stay with you for one moment, because I think one point that Beatrice was making was that if we see a multiplicity of networks and of platforms and of ways in which young people can connect with each other, rather than getting greater connectivity and building interdependence, you might get a level of chaos. Now, you said when you got into your second area, after having made free and open your platform, you spent a lot of time in training, but the training was actually about, in some ways, unleashing leadership. So tell us, how's that leadership play out? And did you find that it was leadership that was really connecting networks in ways that were helping learning, or was there also elements of confusion and even contestation over who was occupying leadership roles?
That's a great question. I think Lorenzo said something really similar to Beatriz, like, let's get together and decide which tools we're going to use and how we're going to use it. And then I have to speak or give a voice to places where things don't work that way. For example, in Latin America, where we understand that society is really complex, and maybe you have a ministry that decides that this is the solution, but the solution may not apply to maybe 80% of the population. So given the current context, leadership arises because there is need for leadership. And I think this is something good. In all that chaos that we're talking about, this right leadership and this learning process in which we understand what's right and what isn't is going to be very, very, very powerful to transform education as we know it. And I think that I'll give you just a couple of examples that I found when these questions appeared. Students are discovering that computers weren't only for gaming after all. They could learn with them. Parents were discovering the immensely challenging tasks that teachers have to teach them. and other parents are discovering the value of being a teacher or being an educator inside of their homes, and they're asking themselves if homeschooling should be an alternative. So all those questions are really tricky ones, but I think they are rich questions. I was talking yesterday with Daniela and Beatriz, and basically I sort of used a metaphor. It's in this current situation, it's like when you wake up from a dream and you remember it, but if you don't talk about it and you don't address those issues in 2, 5, or 10 minutes, you're going to forget about it. So I think this is the best moment to address those questions and try to answer them, but also enabling us to make mistakes and learn from them.
So Daniela, help me out here, because when you talked about distributed leadership, people talk about network-based leadership. They talk about self-organizing. In other words, there's a whole range of different ways in which people now talk about the nature of leadership, and it's certainly not hierarchical. So how do you think about it as ways that will empower people so that, in fact, as you point out, they will become more human? We will unleash energy, that leadership that you're talking about will be in the service of well-being rather than in the service of either confusion or, quite frankly, power struggles, or even just simply ambiguity about the kind of leadership that we need in times like this and going forward. What's your own response to this? The nature of the leadership that can help us in what I might describe as a learning ecosystem, so that we don't even get into this business about within or outside a learning system. An ecosystem is the language that a lot of people use. Daniela?
Yes, sorry, I was muted. There I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Thanks. The first thing that came to mind, and we also discussed this a little bit, and Beatriz brought this up yesterday, is I think we do one role for leadership and education is to help all these distributed leadership, to build a common vision, a vision that we share, a shared vision. Because if not, I think, and I really praise the fact that we're all looking at ways to help, and creativity that is not being hierarchically ruled. But I think that for me, maybe because Mexican education is a federation, it's like one single education in all of the country, right? And but I really think that if leaders can now help build in between them and within the system a shared vision. So where do we want to go? This is what we want to build. This is what we deem important. Then if you jump or you use a radio, or if you don't, or if you courier, or right, then there is something that is bringing us together and aligning our efforts that is deeper, and of course, I think the vision of well-being and it's what that is, and maybe that's a discussion worthwhile having, right, within the leadership, and saying, what is it that we really want to give kids now? I think Beatriz was asking the question. So building a shared vision can really address the issue of like atomizing all the efforts into, I think, that is a lot of effort, a lot of creativity that would hopefully be funneled in one common ground. So for me, just like you said, how to maybe bridge this is how can leaders help organize, at least in their, in their immediate systems, if you're, superintendent and you have a few schools, or if you're higher up, how could we kind of build a shared vision and then allow people to use the creativity and possibility that is, not forcing maybe other things you cannot force, or that you might as well not block, everybody's creativity. And for us, and I think, for example, me as an NGO, I think that what we want to do is really address everyone as people first, like in that sense, like, okay, we can be better, we can trust this capacity we have, we can build these inner strengths. But I think for leaders, that would be a way I think about bridging.
Yeah, bridging is a fantastic way of thinking about this. And Beatriz, let me try this on you. There's a sense in which there's common ground here, because if we take the OECD 2030 work, that framework elevates well-being to the meta purpose. So we're not having an argument ultimately about purpose. But it strikes me that, Beatrice, as we think about how you laid out the challenges of leadership, particularly in a context of school closures and responding with remote learning, and still needing to think about accountability, assessment, what to learn, teacher capacity, equity, and then you put the emphasis, Beatrice, on the leadership of community. Just tell me how you feel, Beatrice, about any tension here, because right now, community might be described differently or defined differently. The leadership of community could be of a different order than the way in which we've thought about school communities. So as you think about the challenge of leading an education system, particularly where we've now got formal as well as informal and non-formal, and now we've got new ways of learning and there are capacities that we can draw upon, I'm just wondering, Beatrice, how you're feeling about the role of the school leader. Is that really the definition of leadership, or must it be broader than that? Must we have partnerships and a whole range of ways in which we are trying to distribute the leadership? What's your reaction to that?
It's very difficult. I think the one thing is the immediate response. And, you know, we are now mixing so many things in a time of crisis when people need kind of a little bit of stability to continue on doing what they were doing. But this also gives us the opportunity to look further, to use this as a jump, I think, as a bridge, as you were saying before, to what could schooling look like in the future. So on the one hand, I think that now we need to make sure we have community so that we have well-being, so that we have some stability. And how do we use what we are learning now in terms of all the different approaches to develop learning for children, to develop a new reimagined education, so that we can think differently of what the school is and the borders of the school are, which are not necessarily only the physical building, but actually become a much larger, you know, the world around us. So we can see, we could think in the future. So you have your school and your own, you still want the relationships. And that is very important. Those you cannot lose. The relationships with the teachers, with the principal, with that community is, I think, is at the heart of learning. But you can also widen it a lot more to have, you know, relationships with others, with networks of other schools. And so here leadership opens up a world of possibilities in the future, I think. And that's what we're seeing now, that, okay, yes, we can send our kids home, we can still have our school, and they can learn this in a different way with Khan Academy or with the TV, but they're still part of our community, but we become a wider community. But I think that we have to, I mean, in the current time of difficulty, challenge, and uncertainty, a little bit of, for students, for parents, it's good to kind of continue a little bit of what is necessary now, at least until the end of the year, to begin with, and then build on all these experiences to explore something new that we can build on all the lessons learned from what we're seeing. So hopefully education policymakers can, I think schools are going much quicker than policymakers, and principals, they are on the ground, they are having to design all the solutions. So who cares what anybody tells them from outside, except for us here. Okay, school will start next May 11. So you go see how you do that. So that's what the policymakers may tell you only. But you have to prepare your own plan, your own action plan. So today we had a meeting with Norway, a country that we're now working with, and they told us that their transition into the remote learning went really smoothly because all their schools had a plan, an emergency plan. And so it was quite simple for them to move for this emergency plan. I don't know, I didn't have time. It was just a quick conversation, but they've had some issues where maybe it required schools to be prepared, or maybe the legislation asks all schools to have a plan. And so when you have preparation, you are better prepared to deal with uncertainty, I think. And we've found, or what I'm seeing, is that there's so many education systems without any emergency plan for anything.
Yeah.
For terrorism a little bit, but not for. So how to swim between the certainty of now and how to build on this for the future, I think it's at the heart of what we need to think for now.
Yeah, I think this is, Beatrice, you just captured something superbly, I think, in the tension that people are feeling. And we're about to go into the community conversation. Dominic, I'm going to call on you in a moment to help us to make that move. But just before I do, let me just comment by saying I think the notion of a bridge that we've talked about, the sense of the interface between, after all, we've got a day that's described here as education disruption, and tomorrow education reimagining. This is exactly the tension that people are feeling. And so, Beatrice, I think you sort of captured that tension right now for leadership and how we respond in the moment. And as you point out, we are going to need to grow learning communities, learning cities, learning societies, a learning planet. That's the task for us, but it's not the task that we can achieve within the next 6 months. But I think this is a really fascinating conversation where I'm going to come back right at the end after raising some of the community conversation questions with each of you and ask you if you, in the spirit of this panel about the role of education leaders in times of global crisis, which is putting the sharp edge, I think, that you're putting on this, Beatrice, I'm going to ask each of you to close with just a reflection on that. How might you capture the essence of the leadership response that we need in this time of global crisis? Just to give you a little bit of notice. So, Dominic, let's go to community conversation. I know questions have been coming in. The chat has been pretty constant. Tweets have been going left, right, and centre. I've got a series of WhatsApp messages here, but I'm pretty sure you've captured a few. So could you help us and explain how we might be able to process a few of these in the next 20 minutes?
Absolutely. Yeah, Tony, Agustin, Daniela, and Beatrice, that was phenomenal. That was such a great discussion, and you could have carried on for hours, I think, and certainly could have carried on listening to yours. So I thank you very much indeed for doing that. And Tony, particularly, it's what, 4 o'clock in the morning in Melbourne now. So, yeah, just remarkable.
Yes,
thank you. You should do all your facilitation in the middle of the night. So we're going to move to the community conversation part now. This is going to be a bit of an experiment, so please bear with us. What we've tried to do during that panel is capture some of the key themes and questions that have been coming up in the chat function on Zoom and on Twitter and on the Facebook commentaries. And we've grouped them around 6 themes. So questions about social and emotional learning, questions about technology, questions about working directly with teachers, questions about working directly with families, a broad set of questions around inequality, and questions around what we value most in education and what do we want to forefront when education systems begin to emerge into a new normal post-COVID-19 disruption. So Tony and I are going to go slide by slide through this, and for all of the speakers who are still on the webinar, including Agustin, Beatrice, and Daniela, if you want to comment or share any insights around any of the questions, then feel free to unmute yourselves and jump in. For everybody else, if you would post comments, answers, suggestions, links to research that you're familiar with in the chat function on Zoom, and we can start to kind of look at a collective intelligence response to these questions. And then the final slide is about themes and ideas for future conferences. As Dr. Asma and I both said at the beginning, we're very committed to this being the first in a series, and we would like to work with everyone who participates in the conference who wants to give time to this to shape and curate how we engage with these topics moving forward. So the first set of questions are around social and emotional learning. This is only a snapshot of some of the breadth of questions that have been shared, but feel free to post comments and responses to these in the chat function. Can you all see my screen first of all?
Yes.
Yes, great.
Yes.
And then Tony or any of the other speakers who are still on the webinar, feel free to offer suggestions, and we'll stay with each slide for a couple of minutes so that people have time to reflect and share their answers before we hand over to Dr. Asma for closing remarks.
I can.
So maybe, yeah, please come in, Daniela.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, go. Yeah, go.
Okay, so I think this intimacy of the face-to-face learning, we've been really surprised by what you can do with technology these days. When we're having like synchronous, like webinars like we're having now, I think there's a lot of connection, and we're sharing ideas and feelings, and I think there's a lot that we can do now. And I think even with older technologies like the radio, I think even we could really use all of this distance to connect, because we're so human that I don't think it's an impediment. As much as I love in-person training, and I'd love to be with all you guys drinking your wine, doing the yoga, and talking about the Paris, I think this is a fantastic, this is a good example of how deep and how profound we can go. Definitely for us, the learners are not the only, and Mark said this, and I was about to clap and jump in the air. There is no way children, or it's very hard. No, not no way, but it's pretty hard. That's also what I see in literature, but I agree with Mark. For children to learn social emotional learning or competency in the air, these are qualities that are modeled, right? And these are qualities, so we really need to help the educators to build these competencies, because you cannot teach what you don't have. And in terms of social and emotional competence, it's even worse, than, I mean, you have to walk your talk. So definitely for us, the focus has been the adults, because we believe that these, even for children from zero in early childhood, and more so for early childhood, a person that can deal with his or her own emotions, that can actually really bring the safe space into the web, into the classroom, that is really will move the kids' development really fast and really far. And in terms of chronic stress, we know a lot about it. It's really, really hurtful, but we must always remember that we can always cultivate resilience. That even though we have had a lot of challenges, and we've lacked many things or are living this very strenuous, and sometimes our lives have been pretty stressful. And toxic stress definitely hurts the developing brain. It hurts your capacity. Like, it's easy to jump into the ethics of survival, me first and I will kill you. It's easy to jump there, but we have immense capacity as human beings. And I think this social aspect in which we can really start caring for each other, and see our own inner potential, but our communal potential. And I think we should never forget that as hard as it gets, we can, and we have this capacity of resilience, and we can help ourselves and others, to tap into those capacities. So we will be able, but we have to address it for sure.
Brilliant. Dominic, go to the next slide. I'm going to exercise a little bit of soft control as we move forward. So Dominic, this one, technology.
So there have been a lot of questions around different platforms and issues around technology that raise questions about inequality. So this is a selection of those. And absolutely invite other speakers from earlier in the conference to chip in if they would like to share any thinking.
Augustine, have a first go at
Should
this.
I? Yeah,
do.
I'll try. I think there's a connection between the first question in slide 1 and the questions that appear on this second slide. And it's one of the trickiest questions that people are asking regarding technology. If technology is a powerful tool, can we avoid having face-to-face connections? So my answer is, half of my time I spend it living as a teacher. And I cannot stress enough that being inside of a classroom and seeing a kid smile, it's invaluable. The 3D version of the kid, not the 2D version of the kid. And, just like having a high five and seeing him just laugh because he understood something that he had such a hard time learning, it's invaluable for me. On the other hand, I understand that a great majority of kids, and this is regarding equality, do not have access to those learning experiences. And this is where I think technology can become a really powerful tool to reach and to ensure equity. And I've seen it, and that's why we work with technology. And when I say technology, let's not think as a supercomputer with the best internet. Just a smartphone with WhatsApp is more than enough to do the trick. And I think that we need to understand that technology is becoming an amazing tool to ensure that kids have access to quality education. And that is something really key to take into consideration.
Beautiful. Thank you. If somebody wants to get in, they're going to have to push their way in here, okay? Because I'm going to move on. Okay, so Dominic, working with teachers, give us a headline on this.
So some really interesting discussion around different modalities for engaging directly with teachers, both across different schools and building ideas about collaboration across schools or across subject areas within a school, and also ways in which school leaders or system leaders need to be able to work with teachers more directly.
Well, Beatrice, you raised this very question about the pressure that teachers are under right now. I mean, I think, it's fascinating to me, Beatrice, that we've had debates, as you well know, in the context of the International Summit on the Teaching Profession for 10 years about teacher status and standing in the community. And the most recent TALIS results raise this matter once again. It's very interesting to me that so many teachers are being expected right now to actually take leadership roles in their communities, in their schools. They are frontline workers. They mightn't be quite as extreme as health workers, but they're not far short. And it's remarkable to me how much the communities are appreciating and valuing the nature of the educator profession in this time of crisis. What's your sense about how you think leaders and teachers at this moment are actually being able to respond and themselves be able to take care, as you pointed out, of the rest of their lives and their own levels of anxiety? Beatrice?
Yes, I think that's a very difficult question. We have, the TALIS survey, the teaching and learning survey that is done for a number of countries, and they ask a lot about questions about anxiety and about their self-efficacy and their needs for training. And you can see that, many are dealing with very challenging environments regularly. So just imagine when you have to move into this new environment without a lot of training, without a lot of clear support. But I think teachers are passionate about what they do. And this is what they're working with their own motivation, their energy, and they're trying to reach their students no matter how, with WhatsApp, with whatever anybody will give them, they will do that. And I think that's something it's beautiful, but it should not be sustainable. There should be a much better professional way for them to be able to live through this, and so that they can take care of their own. It may be a transition of a month where it's very difficult, but they should have the time, and it should be well organized for them to be able to handle this as a profession. So just like doctors or nurses, teachers are going through stress. They have to handle going back to school. The challenges, here now people are clapping because it's 8 o'clock and people are clapping now for the doctors and nurses out the window. So they will soon clap for teachers, I think. And they have to handle, if they go to school, will they catch COVID? Because kids are normally, they will carry it. And there are such high risks for them too when they go back to school. So will they want to go back to school? How do we protect them to make sure that they have, the health coverage, all the health measures required for them to have a protected school, I think. And that's quite important for now. And because if they don't have well-being, our students will not have well-being. And therefore, I think it's just so as important. So, and one other issue that I didn't raise before, and that one of the chat raised, is about students. In all this process, again, more and more students know what they want and know the tools to be able to deliver. And so they are the first ones we need to ask how they are living this environment. Maybe they're enjoying it, actually. We haven't done that many surveys. We don't know. We all talk from our very high level perspective.
Yeah.
How are students living this? Do they want to go back to school? Do they rather have a half-day school? I mean, this is something where we could learn quite a lot onto the future that we should be asking. And I think that's
absolutely
a big
Beatrice,
priority for me.
Yeah, that reminds me, I mean, at the heart of so much of our work recently has been learner agency and learner power. This is a crisis in which we are going to see revealed, not just a low-level voice of learners, but what we've all been calling for. That is a game changer. Bring the next slide up, Dominic, and just as you do, Augustine, I want to ask you one question about teachers before we go to families. You said you've done more than 60 sessions with teachers. Give us like one paragraph on how those teachers have responded to what you've provided.
I would say they are heroes, and I'm not overstating. We delivered not only for teachers, but to psychopedagogues that work with kids with special needs. And they are spending more than 14 or 16 hours a day to make sure that they learn what they need to learn and that they are there for their kids. And I think that's really honorable. And I think what Beatrice said is they have a calling. They do this because they love it, in spite of whatever cost it has for them in a personal manner. So once again, I would stress on what Beatrice said. This is not sustainable. Let's clap for them, but afterwards, let's start asking our questions as how do we empower them and we give them the tools to do their job the right way. Exactly.
Yeah. Danielle, have a go at this, because you said before that the distributed leadership explicitly included parents, families. What's your sense of how we should be working with families at this point in moments of crisis, but what this can tell us about the partnership with families as we go forward?
Well, it's a huge question, but maybe I just like to. I was thinking a lot while we were having this discussion in leadership, and that including the family. How if I would think, and this I really follow Janet Patty, she's Mark Brackett's collaborator, and Peter Senge and other authors, but really, if leaders in this distributed leadership, the leaders, like the traditional leaders, can help arrange people to have really healthy generative relationships where they can have meaningful conversations about learning, because learning is the issue for schools, right? So normally we don't have enough time for that. And if leaders can say, I cannot tell everybody what to do and how to do, I'm at my odds end, or how do you say in English? I don't know, right? And teach, and the same for parents. So could they help organize this peer learning? And really there is something that comes up. I mean, now we see, just as parents are seeing, my God, I want to make a monument for teachers, or how hard it is, to teach. And we also see more than ever something that's always been true, that parents are educators, we're all educators, right? So could we organize, or leaders in particular, organize these spaces for generative and meaningful conversations so that the teachers could really converse about what they need to work together, they need themselves to take care of themselves, how to focus on what's important for this learning. If we can help the kids participate and again talk about what is meaningful for them, what is helping them. And I think we have to integrate the families into this and listen and try to see. I think that's one very big takeaway for me hearing this. I mean, it's really us, no? It's more and more how education is everybody's business, not just the poor teacher business.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so in that sense, if we could really organize ways to listen to the families and help that peer learning, like you said, a learning family,
Yeah.
a learning school, a learning environment, a learning education environment beyond the school, right? I think that would be wonderful if leaders could help organize that kind of peer learning in all these levels, families, students, and teachers.
Fantastic. Go to the last slide.
I love that idea, Daniela, that you were talking about the kind of breadth of responsibility for education. Some of the chat on Twitter and some of the things that we're going to be talking about more tomorrow are about the role of employers, for example, at the moment in terms of enabling the additional role that parents have to do and all the additional role that teachers have to do. So we've got one slide about inequality and then a final slide about the things that we value most in education.
Okay, and then I'm going to remind my dear panel members I've got a final question for them, a challenge on leadership in times of crisis. Beatrice, go to this one, because on a couple of occasions the equity question was centre in the way in which you were responding. You were saying the system, how we respond now, is going to be measured. It's going to be judged by the way in which we are able to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. What's your sense here at the moment? Is this a dominant part of what you're seeing as the response from different jurisdictions? Because sitting in OECD, you are seeing this in a very, very interesting way across multiple jurisdictions, north, south, right? It is fascinating to see the way in which different countries are placing equity front and centre in their responses. What's your comment on this?
Okay, we still don't know fully what's happening. We don't have a direct line, or we just starting to get the information. But I think from what I'm hearing, what I'm reading, that everyone is talking about equity. Everywhere, everywhere in that I've heard, equity is the issue. So just as it was before, it's becoming even bigger now. And so I know, as I said, that school systems, all of our systems are public school systems in OECD countries. And they target all students, not only, I think there's other countries where schools, you need to pay for them, but here, OECD countries have public school systems for almost all their students. And so the effort is to reach those where they are having more challenges, they're not connected, or their parents can't support them, they don't have a place to learn, they don't have the technology, they don't have the meals, because school also gives them meals often, and they can't handle it at home. So I'm reading or hearing about schools organizing the sending of lunches to kids who are disadvantaged, sending of books, sending of tablets, all of these kinds of outreach efforts by the public system to reach those that are more of a challenge. And I was looking at Spain, for example, where I read in the newspaper that they were, trying to find these lost students, those that kind of fell out of the system here, and they're kind of trying to see with IT and through the schools, who are they, and following them actually to bring them back. So I think there's quite a concern about inequality, and a lot of efforts to try to bring them back with different means. And I think this is how, from the comments, there's a lot of TV, a lot of radio, a lot of WhatsApp, lots of all these different ways of reaching kids. Now, I think that the more difficult part is the motivation, because often the more not often, some may be unmotivated, and it's very difficult to bring them back in this way. So the personal, the friendships, and what school gives them how do you find that in the current environment? I think that's
Yes.
one of the challenges of motivating those that are hardest to motivate in schooling.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the language about learning is everybody's business, and the fact that we do want public-private partnerships to be making significant contributions, and Dominic's earlier point about the role of industry and employers, all of this is what we've all been demanding. The crisis is getting a response. The question is to what extent we can then build that in to public education systems to ensure that we are continuously addressing the most marginalised, the most vulnerable. Dominic, bring up your last slide, and then I'm going to do one final question for our panel members.
Could I say one thing very quickly? Just that there has been a lot of public-private partnerships that have been really, really helpful. And as an example, Spain, when COVID happened, right away, they got together with all the major publishing companies to deliver the program online. And they all partnered together, all the competitors, they partnered together.
Yes.
They offered
Yes.
the program in a week, very quickly, by doing this partnership.
Superb. Dominic.
So, Tony, while you ask the question, the final question to the panelists, because we're almost at time.
All right.
I'd love to invite the audience to share thoughts and themes that they'd like future conferences in this series to address, and then we'll be able to whittle them down and engage with everyone in the post-conference conversations around these topics.
Wonderful. So you're asking people to make those contributions, and you'll curate those and gather those together, yes?
Absolutely, yes. So if they could share ideas in the chat function, that would be brilliant, while you close out the panel with the final question.
Fantastic. All right, so just before I pass to Dr. Asma to wrap up this session, here we go with the big question that you have to respond to in 30 seconds each. And that is, if you had to identify the role of an education leader in times of global crisis, how would you capture that? So, Beatrice, let me start with you.
Oh, that's mean. So, well, I think, as I said before, and even more now, collaboration is at the heart. Leaders cannot do it alone. And it's a matter of developing a shared vision, developing a shared understanding, developing technical leadership. I think it's important, and developing professionals' capacity and equity. But at the heart is building community. I think that I'm sorry, I have my father.
Brilliant.
He's closed in Madrid.
Beautiful. Fantastic. Thank you. Daniela.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm very much resonating with Beatrice, what she just said. And for me, this establishing community, I could think that leaders could, or I would suggest, to really try to establish these collaborations in which people, both for the teachers, for the families, and for the children, establish maybe platforms in which they can really share or establish this shared ground. How do they want to relate? How do they want to feel? How can they care for themselves? How can they care for the community? I think we need to address that first, but then really go into other generative conversations, really meaningful about learning. So then we can really focus, and have these, so the leaders could more like build and help the space in the community for those conversations on learning.
Thank you. Thank you. Augustine.
Okay. I think that we need to have a common understanding of what is needed and to give a voice to each one of the actors in the educational system. I think this is something that we addressed over the panel, giving a voice to the kids and knowing what they need, giving a voice to the parents and understanding how their current situation is and what tools do they have to ensure that their kids have access to quality education, how we give teachers the tools to really do what they know to do best, and how leaders can enable all this amazing work that is being done in a more organized and more directed way. I think that would be my final thought.
Superb. Augustine, Daniela, Beatrice, thank you. Fantastic session. Asma, over to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all. Thank you very much for everyone who participated in this event, session 2. And a special thank you for our speakers and keynotes and moderators who shared their thoughts and perspectives. I've enjoyed the discussion on each session, on social media, and on the chat in Zoom. I have 3 points for my conclusion. As a reminder, Dominic mentioned in his opening remarks that one of the objectives of this event is to help us understand what is happening in different education systems during the COVID-19 pandemic, and also to provide an opportunity to exchange ideas and practices across different education systems and hearing practical solutions from our community. We heard today from programs in Ontario, Italy, Morocco, France, Mexico, and Argentina, and responding to the disruption the pandemic is causing. And I totally agree with Petra's point from OECD about the importance of getting good data during a crisis. And I'm glad that this event is an opportunity for sharing and exchanging ideas and practices. It was great to see people are sharing links and studies, and all of this information are really helpful. It's hard to highlight all the great points came in the discussion. Lorenzo from Italy shared 3 questions that I think need to be discussed by education systems across the world because they resonate far beyond Italy. And I will choose one of these questions. What can we do starting from now to make sure that whoever has lost progress during this crisis can get back on track once the schools are open again? This is a very important question and so relevant to our discussion tomorrow on reimagined education. That's the second part of our theme for this event. Another point about sharing, our two keynotes from both this evening and this morning confirmed that social emotional learning is now even more critical to cope with in this uncertain, unpredictable future. And more importantly, I want to remind all of us about the tips that Mark Brackett gave us on healthy emotion regulation. He mentioned 7 reminders for all of us. First, meditation and mindful breathing, self-care, healthy relationships, managing our thoughts, managing our life smartly, doing meaningful things we enjoy, and finally, to give ourselves permission to fail and forgive. Thank you, Mark, for all these tips. Number 2, in my closing, we would like to end this session with a call for action to follow up on our discussion. And we are we will work with Salzburg on practical steps. First, we will continue our conversation in partnership with Salzburg Global Seminar. We will be soon announcing a second event to take place in June. We will also announce in the next few days other ways we can continue the conversation, including smaller working groups discussion, Twitter chats, and other venues. And it has been great to see the interaction between participants in the chat and in social media so far. Another step, we will also send out a survey to all who participated in this event to help us hear from you and understand the most critical issues, needs, and gaps that we should address in our next large event in June. Also, requests came in the chat about the presentation, so the team will share the presentation after this event. And also taking an action from your side as a participant. Please share the hashtag #ClapForTeachers to show our support for teachers and school leaders. Thank you, Beatrice, for reminding all of us about the heroes working on the ground. Finally, I want to end with this quote: never let a serious crisis go to waste. This event proves to us that we are all in this together and responding to this crisis from a space of collaboration and deeper understanding. Once again, thank you all very much for your contribution. I'm looking forward to meeting you all again tomorrow for part 2 of our event. Thank you.